The complete story of Mark Zuckerberg, the king of social media. The journey from the Facebook to Meta. Mark Zuckerberg was born on May 14, 1984 in White Plains, New York. He came into a world that was experiencing massive technological transformation. The personal computer revolution was just a decade old. Apple had launched the Macintosh earlier that year. The internet as we know it did not exist yet. Most people still used typewriters and made phone calls from landlines attached to walls. But technology was beginning to change everything. Companies like Microsoft and Apple were growing rapidly. Video games were becoming mainstream. The seeds of the digital age were being planted all around young Mark's childhood. The year 1984 was pivotal in many ways. Ronald Reagan was president and the Cold War was still raging. The economy was recovering from recession. Personal computers were moving from hobbyist toys to serious business tools. The Apple Macintosh introduced the graphical user interface to mainstream consumers. IBM dominated corporate computing. But the most important technology for Mark's future was still years away. The World Wide Web would not be invented until 1989. Mosaic, the first popular web browser, would not appear until 1993. Mark would grow up alongside the internet itself. Mark's father, Edward Zuckerberg, was a dentist who ran his practice from their home in Dobbs Ferry, New York. Edward was not just any dentist though. He was an early technology enthusiast who saw how computers could transform his practice. He installed one of the first computerized dental record systems in his office. He taught himself programming and built custom software for managing patient appointments and billing. Edward's dental office became a showcase for how technology could improve a traditional profession. Young Mark watched his father embrace technology fearlessly. He saw how his dad learned new skills and solved problems with computers. Edward's approach to technology was hands-on and practical. He did not wait for perfect solutions or expert help. He dove in, experimented, made mistakes, and figured things out. This attitude would profoundly influence Mark. Edward also valued education and intellectual achievement. He pushed his children to excel academically while encouraging their interests and passions. The Zuckerberg household was middle-class, comfortable but not wealthy. They lived well but were not extravagant. Edward's dental practice provided a stable income. The family could afford computers and education, but Mark grew up understanding the value of work and achievement. Mark's mother, Karen Zuckerberg, worked as a psychiatrist before becoming a full-time mother to raise Mark and his 3 sisters. Karen brought psychological insight and emotional intelligence to the family. She understood child development and learning. She recognized Mark's exceptional abilities early and worked to nurture them without pushing too hard. Karen created an environment where intellectual curiosity was encouraged. She asked questions, listened carefully, and helped her children think through problems. Where Edward provided the technical foundation, Karen provided emotional support and psychological understanding. This combination would prove crucial for Mark's development. Karen also brought balance to Mark's upbringing. While Edward encouraged Mark's computer obsession, Karen made sure he had other experiences. She insisted on family dinners and conversations. She encouraged social interaction even when Mark preferred his computer. She recognized that brilliance needed to be balanced with social skills and emotional awareness. This was not always easy. Mark was intensely focused on his interests to the exclusion of almost everything else. But Karen persisted, planting seeds of social awareness that would become important later in his life. Mark was the only boy with 3 sisters, Randy, Donna, and Ariel. Being the only brother in a house full of sisters shaped Mark in important ways. He learned to communicate with girls from an early age. He saw firsthand how women thought and what they cared about. This would influence Facebook's design years later. The platform's emphasis on relationships and social connection reflected Mark's upbringing in a relationship-focused household. His sisters also provided competition and motivation. They were smart and accomplished. Mark had to work hard to stand out and prove himself. Birth order mattered too. As the second child and only son, Mark had certain advantages. his older sister Randy pioneered dealing with their parents' expectations. Mark could learn from her experiences. He had slightly more freedom to pursue his obsessions. But he also felt pressure to differentiate himself and achieve at the highest levels. His younger sisters looked up to him. He felt responsible for setting a good example. This combination of freedom, pressure, and responsibility would characterize his entire career. The Zuckerberg family was Reformed Jewish. They attended temple and celebrated major holidays but were not strictly religious. Judaism provided cultural identity and community more than rigid doctrine. The Jewish tradition of questioning, debating, and intellectual inquiry influenced Mark deeply. Jewish culture values education, achievement, and making a positive impact on the world. These values were transmitted not through heavy-handed lessons but through family culture and example. Mark absorbed the idea that he should use his talents to do something meaningful. The family lived in Dobbs Ferry, a village in Westchester County, New York. This was an upper-middle-class suburb with excellent schools and highly educated residents. Many parents commuted to Manhattan for work. The community valued education intensely. Kids were expected to excel academically and attend top colleges. Competition was fierce but usually unspoken. This environment pushed Mark to achieve but also gave him access to excellent resources. The high school had computer labs and advanced courses. Families could afford private tutors and enrichment programs. Mark grew up in an environment that maximized his chances for success. Mark's first exposure to computers came very early. His father brought home a Quantex computer when Mark was around 10 years old. Ed would set it up in his dental office and began teaching himself programming. Young Mark was immediately fascinated. He watched his father write code and build programs. Then he started experimenting himself. Edward encouraged this interest enthusiastically. He bought books on programming and sat with Mark as they worked through tutorials together. Father and son bonded over this shared interest in technology and problem solving. By age 11, Mark was writing his first real program. He created a messaging system for his father's dental office called Zucknet. The system connected computers in the dental office with their home computer. It allowed the receptionist to notify Edward when a patient arrived without yelling through the house. This was Mark's first taste of how software could solve real problems. He experienced the satisfaction of building something people actually used. The program was simple but functional. More importantly, it showed Mark he could create tools that improved people's lives. Zucknet also revealed something important about Mark's approach to technology. He was not interested in technology for its own sake. He did not care about technical elegance or clever algorithms. He cared about building tools that connected people and solved problems. Even at 11, Mark was focused on communication and human connection through technology. This would remain his core focus for his entire career. While other programmers got lost in technical details, Mark always returned to the human element. What problem does this solve? How will people use it? Does it make their lives better? Mark's childhood was dominated by his obsession with computers. While other kids played sports or video games, Mark coded. He spent hours in his room writing programs and learning new languages. He moved from BASIC to C++ to other languages rapidly. He read programming books voraciously. He experimented constantly, building small programs and games. His parents worried occasionally that he was too isolated. But they also recognized genuine passion and talent. They provided resources and support while trusting Mark to find his own path. The intensity of Mark's focus was unusual even among gifted children. He did not have many friends or social activities. He was not interested in typical teenage pursuits. He did not care about popularity or fitting in. He found his peer group online, connecting with other young programmers through early internet forums and communities. These online relationships were often more meaningful to Mark than his real-world social connections. He could talk about programming and technology with people who shared his passion. This early experience with online community would profoundly influence Facebook's design. Mark attended Ardsley High School initially, where he was clearly the smartest student in most of his classes. He exhausted the school's computer science curriculum quickly. His teachers recognized they had nothing left to teach him. His parents hired a private programming tutor, David Newman, to work with Mark. Newman was a software developer who recognized Mark's extraordinary talent immediately. He later said teaching Mark was unlike teaching anyone else. Mark absorbed concepts instantly and pushed beyond the lesson to explore implications and applications. Newman introduced Mark to more advanced programming concepts and artificial intelligence. During high school, Mark and his friend Adam D'Angelo built a music player called Synapse. The program used artificial intelligence to learn the user's music preferences and create customized playlists. This was revolutionary for its time, years before Pandora or Spotify existed. Synapse attracted attention from major technology companies. Both Microsoft and AOL approached Mark about acquiring the software or hiring him. Several companies offered him over $1 million. Mark was just a high school student being offered serious money for his work. This was his first taste of how valuable his skills could be. But Mark turned down all the acquisition offers. He was not interested in money at that point. He wanted to keep learning and building. He wanted to go to college and expand his knowledge. The decision to reject the acquisition offers was telling. It showed that Mark was motivated by creation and learning, not primarily by money. He could have become a millionaire at 17. Instead, he chose education and growth. This would become a pattern throughout his career. Mark consistently chose long-term potential over short-term financial gain. His parents supported the decision to turn down the money. They wanted Mark to get a college education and experience normal life as much as possible. They worried about him missing important developmental experiences if he became wealthy and famous too young. Edward and Karen's decision to prioritize education over immediate financial success revealed their values. They were playing the long game with Mark's development. This patience and long-term thinking would characterize Mark's own approach to building Facebook years later. Mark's high school years also showed early signs of the personality traits that would later define him. He was intensely competitive despite his quiet demeanor. He wanted to be the best at everything he attempted. He studied ancient Greek and Latin not because he loved languages but because he wanted to prove he could excel at something completely different from computer science. He captained the fencing team, drawn to the individual competition and strategic thinking. These activities showed Mark pushing himself to master different domains and compete at high levels. His competitiveness was intellectual rather than social. He did not care about being popular or well-liked. He cared about being the smartest person in the room. He cared about solving problems no one else could solve. He cared about building things no one else had built. This drive would serve him extraordinarily well as an entrepreneur but would also create challenges. Mark's need to win sometimes overrode other considerations. His focus on being right sometimes made him dismissive of others' perspectives. These tendencies were visible even in high school. Mark's decision about college was never really in doubt. He would attend Harvard. This was the pinnacle of academic achievement in America. It would give him access to the best professors, the smartest peers, and unlimited resources. Harvard accepted Mark based on his exceptional academic record and obvious talent. But the decision to attend Harvard rather than accepting job offers showed something important. Mark valued the Harvard brand and credential. He understood that pedigree mattered. Years later, Facebook would initially launch exclusively at Harvard and Ivy League schools. Mark understood elite institutions created network effects and social capital. In fall 2002, Mark arrived at Harvard as a freshman. He was 17 years old, younger than most of his classmates. He moved into Kirkland House, a residential dormitory on campus. College was Mark's first experience living away from home and managing his own life. For most students, this transition is challenging. But for Mark, college was liberating. He could focus entirely on his interests without parental oversight. He could code all night if he wanted. He could skip classes that did not interest him. He could connect with other brilliant students who shared his passions. Harvard in 2002 was experiencing the aftermath of the dot-com bubble burst. The internet boom had crashed spectacularly just 2 years earlier. Billions of dollars in wealth had evaporated. Hundreds of internet companies had failed. The prevailing wisdom was that most internet ideas were overhyped nonsense. Traditional career paths in consulting and finance looked safer and smarter than technology startups. This cultural moment would prove crucial for Mark. While everyone else was skeptical of internet businesses, Mark was building internet tools in his dorm room. At Harvard, Mark quickly gained a reputation as a programming prodigy. Other students sought him out for help with computer science assignments. He built small projects constantly, experimenting with different ideas and technologies. His approach was to build quickly, launch, see what happened, and move on to the next project. He was not precious about any individual project. He cared about learning and creating, not about perfecting any particular application. This bias toward action and rapid iteration would become Facebook's core cultural value. One of Mark's early college projects was CourseMatch, a program that helped students decide which classes to take based on who else was enrolling. The idea was simple but powerful. Students cared not just about course content but about who else would be in class with them. CourseMatch surfaced this hidden information, making the social dimensions of class selection visible and usable. The application was popular immediately. Students recognized its utility. But more importantly, CourseMatch revealed Mark's focus on social dynamics. He was not building tools for individual productivity. He was building tools that made social information visible and actionable. Then came FaceMash, the project that would nearly get Mark expelled and would eventually lead to Facebook. In fall 2003, Mark was frustrated that Harvard did not have an online directory with student photos. Most universities had physical Facebooks, printed directories with photos of all students. But Harvard's was incomplete and outdated. Mark decided to create a digital version. On one night in October 2003, Mark hacked into Harvard's residential databases and downloaded student photos. He then built a website where users could compare two photos and vote on who was more attractive. FaceMash went viral instantly. Within hours, hundreds of Harvard students were using the site. The Harvard network crashed from the traffic. University administrators were furious. Mark had violated multiple rules. He had hacked into secure systems. He had used student photos without permission. He had created an application that objectified people and violated privacy. Mark was brought before the administrative board, Harvard's disciplinary body. He faced possible expulsion. The hearing was tense. Mark apologized but also defended the project's technical merit. He argued he had not intended harm, only experimentation. The administrative board ultimately decided not to expel Mark. They put him on probation and required him to meet with counselors about appropriate behavior. This lenient punishment revealed Harvard's conflicted feelings. Yes, Mark had broken rules. But he had also demonstrated exceptional talent. Universities exist to nurture genius, even when it comes in difficult packages. Expelling Mark would mean losing one of the most talented students in Harvard's history. So they gave him another chance. This pattern would repeat throughout Mark's career. His exceptional abilities would earn him second chances and forgiveness that others might not receive. FaceMash taught Mark crucial lessons. First, people were intensely interested in social comparison and status. The voting mechanism was addictive because it tapped into deep human psychology. Second, applications that spread through social networks could achieve incredible scale incredibly quickly. Third, privacy and ethics were complicated issues he needed to think about more carefully. And fourth, moving fast and breaking things could get you in trouble but could also lead to breakthrough success. Mark absorbed all these lessons. They would directly inform Facebook's design just months later. The FaceMash controversy also introduced Mark to a group of students who would play important roles in Facebook's founding. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss were twin brothers from a wealthy Connecticut family. They were varsity rowers, conventionally handsome and socially successful. They were also interested in building a social network for Harvard students. After FaceMash demonstrated the demand for social tools, the Winklevoss twins approached Mark about working on their project called Harvard Connection, later renamed ConnectU. They wanted a programmer who could build the technical infrastructure for their vision. Mark agreed to work on the Winklevoss project in November 2003. He attended meetings, reviewed their plans, and began writing some code. But he was never fully committed. He found the Winklevoss twins conventional and unimaginative. Their vision for Harvard Connection was essentially an online dating site for Harvard students. Mark thought this was too narrow and not technically interesting. More importantly, he was developing his own ideas for a more comprehensive social network. He saw a bigger opportunity than the Winklevosses did. So while he strung them along nominally working on their project, he was secretly building his own. This situation would later explode into legal controversy. The Winklevosses would claim Mark stole their idea. Mark would claim his vision was completely different and that lots of people were thinking about online social networks in late 2003. Both claims contained truth. The idea of an online social network was in the air. Multiple people were working on similar concepts. But Mark did mislead the Winklevoss twins about his commitment to their project while simultaneously building a competing product. This ethical ambiguity would haunt Facebook for years. In January 2004, Mark began coding what would become Facebook. He worked alone in his dorm room, fueled by pizza and energy drinks, writing thousands of lines of code. The initial version was remarkably simple. Students could create profiles, upload photos, list their interests and courses, and see who else was in their classes or social groups. The design was clean and minimal. The focus was on real identity and real social connections, not anonymous interactions or dating. Mark called it the Facebook, using Harvard's term for student directories. The technical architecture was straightforward but well designed. Mark used PHP for the web interface, MySQL for the database, and Linux for the server. These were standard open-source tools, not cutting-edge technology. Facebook's innovation was not technical. It was conceptual and cultural. Mark understood that the killer feature was not the software but the social graph, the network of real relationships between real people using their real identities. This insight separated Facebook from previous social networking attempts. Friendster and MySpace allowed fake identities and encouraged meeting strangers. Facebook was about connecting with people you already knew. Mark launched the Facebook on February 4, 2004 from his dorm room. He had built the initial version in about 2 weeks of intense coding. The site was available only to Harvard students with harvard.edu email addresses. This exclusivity was crucial. It created scarcity and prestige. It ensured the network started with a coherent community sharing a common identity. And it made the social graph immediately useful because everyone on the platform had real-world connections through Harvard. Within 24 hours, over 1,000 Harvard students had signed up. Within a month, over half of Harvard undergraduates had profiles. The growth was organic and viral in the truest sense. Mark did not advertise or market the Facebook. Students told their friends, who told their friends. The platform spread through the existing social networks on Harvard's campus. Roommates signed up their roommates. Study groups joined together. Student organizations created group pages. The network effects were immediate and powerful. The more people joined, the more useful the platform became for everyone. This was Mark's first experience with exponential growth driven purely by network effects. The experience was intoxicating and would shape all his future decisions. Mark quickly realized he needed help to manage the growing site. He recruited his roommate Dustin Moskowitz to help with coding and operations. Dustin was a brilliant economics student who taught himself programming. He became Facebook's first real employee, though there were no formal titles or salaries yet. Mark and Dustin worked side by side, coding through the night, responding to user complaints, fixing bugs, and adding features. Their partnership worked because they had complementary skills. Mark was the visionary and product designer. Dustin was the operational executive who made things work reliably. Mark also brought in Chris Hughes to handle communications and user relations. Chris was not a programmer. He was a history and literature student interested in politics and media. But Mark recognized that Facebook needed more than great code. It needed someone who understood users and could communicate effectively. Chris became the voice of Facebook, writing friendly emails to users, managing customer support, and thinking about how to grow the community. This early decision to value non-technical skills alongside programming excellence would serve Facebook well. The final key early member was Eduardo Saverin, who became Facebook's business manager and chief financial officer. Eduardo was Mark's friend and neighbor in Kirkland House. He came from a wealthy Brazilian family and had business experience. Eduardo provided the initial funding for Facebook's servers and operations. He put in around $15,000 of his own money. In return, Mark made Eduardo a 30% co-founder and gave him responsibility for business development and monetization. This partnership would end catastrophically just a year later, but in early 2004, Eduardo provided crucial resources and business credibility. The team dynamic in Facebook's early days was intense and exciting. For college students were building something that was clearly resonating with users. They worked constantly, barely attending classes, neglecting sleep and social lives. Their dorm room became Facebook's first headquarters. Servers hummed in closets. The room smelled of pizza and energy drinks. Friends stopped by to hang out and ended up helping answer user emails or test new features. It was chaotic but exhilarating. Everyone could feel they were building something special even if they did not fully understand how big it would become. By March 2004, just 1 month after launch, Facebook had expanded to Columbia, Stanford, and Yale. Mark was carefully controlling the rollout. He wanted to maintain the platform's exclusivity while growing strategically. He chose elite universities that would attract high-quality users and generate buzz. Each school's launch was an event. Students at new universities eagerly awaited access. This manufactured scarcity created desire. Students at schools without Facebook felt left out. They emailed Mark constantly begging him to launch at their universities. Mark used this demand as a bargaining chip, setting up a dynamic where universities and students competed for Facebook's attention. The expansion strategy revealed Mark's intuitive understanding of social psychology and network effects. He could have launched at every university immediately. The code was ready. The demand was there. But Mark deliberately created artificial scarcity. He understood that exclusivity creates value. Harvard students felt special because they had Facebook first. When Stanford launched, Stanford students felt they were part of an elite club. This sense of being in an exclusive network became part of Facebook's brand identity. Years later, Facebook would use similar tactics with features like the Newsfeed and timeline, rolling them out gradually to specific groups first. By summer 2004, Facebook faced crucial decisions about its future. The platform had grown to 30,000 users across several dozen universities. But it was still a college project run from a dorm room with no revenue and no clear business model. Mark and his co-founders needed to decide whether to continue as a college side project or become a real company. They were receiving acquisition offers and investment inquiries. Traditional wisdom said they should sell or shut down and focus on school. The dot-com bubble's collapse was still fresh in everyone's memory. Internet startups were considered risky and foolish. Mark made a decision that would define his career. He decided to go all in on Facebook. He would leave Harvard, move to California, and try to build Facebook into a real business. This decision shocked almost everyone. Harvard students did not drop out. They finished their degrees, got prestigious jobs, and had successful conventional careers. Dropping out was seen as throwing away incredible privilege and opportunity. Mark's parents were supportive but worried. His professors thought he was making a mistake. Most of his friends thought he was crazy to give up Harvard for an uncertain startup. But Mark had a vision. He believed social networks would become fundamental infrastructure for human communication. He believed Facebook could connect everyone in the world. He believed building Facebook was the most important thing he could do with his life. Years later, he would say that decision felt obvious despite everyone's skepticism. He could always go back to Harvard. He could not rebuild the momentum Facebook was gaining. This confidence despite universal skepticism showed Mark's extraordinary self-belief. He trusted his own judgment over everyone else's advice. This trait would serve him well and also get him into trouble throughout his career. The decision to move to Silicon Valley was crucial. Palo Alto, California was the heart of the technology industry. Stanford University was nearby. Venture capital firms lined Sand Hill Road. Experienced entrepreneurs and engineers were everywhere. Moving to Silicon Valley meant accessing the ecosystem that understood internet businesses. It meant finding mentors who had built successful companies. It meant hiring engineers who wanted to work on ambitious technical challenges. Boston had universities and intelligence but lacked Silicon Valley's entrepreneurial intensity and infrastructure. Mark needed to be where internet businesses were taken seriously. Mark convinced Dustin Moskowitz to drop out of Harvard and move west with him. Chris Hughes and Eduardo Saverin initially stayed at Harvard but remained involved remotely. In June 2004, Mark and Dustin drove across the country to California in Mark's car. They rented a small house in Palo Alto with several other young engineers and entrepreneurs. The house became legendary in Silicon Valley lore. Multiple startups were founded or housed there. Parties attracted investors and entrepreneurs. Mark worked constantly, coding, recruiting, and meeting potential investors. The informal, chaotic energy of the house matched the informal, chaotic energy of Facebook itself. That summer, Facebook gained its first real investor and advisor. Sean Parker had co-founded Napster, the revolutionary music sharing service that had disrupted the recording industry before being shut down by lawsuits. Sean was just 24 years old but was already a Silicon Valley celebrity. He had experience with viral growth and network effects. He understood the music industry, copyright battles, and dealing with powerful interests opposed to your business. Sean met Mark through friends and immediately saw Facebook's potential. He thought it could become as significant as Napster but without the legal vulnerabilities. Sean became Facebook's president and Mark's closest advisor. He introduced Mark to investors, helped negotiate deals, and advised on strategy. More importantly, Sean understood the social and political dynamics of Silicon Valley. He knew which investors to work with and which to avoid. He knew how to structure deals to maintain founder control. He taught Mark about liquidity preferences, board composition, and other technical aspects of venture capital. Without Sean's guidance, Mark would have made costly mistakes. Sean also validated Mark's most ambitious visions. When Mark talked about connecting everyone in the world, Sean did not laugh. He helped figure out how to actually do it. Sean's arrival also created tension with Eduardo Saverin. Eduardo had been Facebook's business leader and felt threatened by Sean's presence. The two had very different approaches. Eduardo wanted to sell advertising immediately and generate revenue. Sean thought premature monetization would kill growth. Eduardo wanted to be cautious and preserve resources. Sean pushed for aggressive growth. The conflict came to a head in a series of meetings and confrontations during summer 2004. Mark sided with Sean over Eduardo. This decision would lead to Eduardo's eventual departure and a bitter legal battle. In summer 2004, Facebook received its first major venture capital investment. Peter Thiel, who had co-founded PayPal and sold it to eBay for $1.5 billion, invested $500,000 in Facebook. This was actually a relatively small amount by venture capital standards. But Thiel's involvement was symbolically crucial. He was one of Silicon Valley's most successful and respected entrepreneurs. His investment validated Facebook as a serious business. It gave Mark credibility with other investors and potential employees. It signaled that smart money believed Facebook could become something significant. Thiel's investment came with important terms that Sean Parker negotiated. The deal valued Facebook at around $4.9 million but structured the investment to leave Mark with majority control of the company's voting shares. This was unusual. Most venture capital investments dilute the founder's control significantly. But Sean and Mark insisted on maintaining control. They believed founder control was essential to Facebook's long-term success. They did not want investors or board members forcing short-term decisions that conflicted with the long-term vision. This emphasis on founder control would become a controversial but defining feature of Facebook's governance structure. The Thiel investment also brought Mark into a powerful network. Thiel introduced Mark to other PayPal Mafia members, the group of entrepreneurs and investors who had worked at PayPal and gone on to found or fund companies like LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, and Tesla. This network provided mentorship, connections, and support. Mark learned from people who had built and sold successful internet companies. He saw what worked and what did not. He absorbed lessons about hiring, culture, product development, and dealing with competition. This informal education was more valuable than anything he could have learned at Harvard Business School. By fall 2004, Facebook was growing explosively. The platform had expanded to most major universities across America. Over 1 million users had signed up. Usage was intense and growing. Students spent hours per day on Facebook checking friends' profiles, uploading photos, and messaging. The platform was becoming essential to college social life. Facebook stalking became a common activity. Relationship status changes became public events. Photo tagging created new forms of social interaction and accountability. Facebook was not just a website. It was becoming social infrastructure. The growth created intense operational challenges. Facebook servers constantly crashed from traffic overload. The small engineering team worked frantically to keep the site running while simultaneously adding features and expanding to new schools. There was no time for careful planning or beautiful code. Everything was built quickly and pragmatically. Facebook accumulated massive technical debt, messy code, and system design that would need to be fixed later. But the priority was growth. Mark's philosophy was move fast and break things. He believed speed was more important than perfection. You could always fix technical problems later, but you could not recover lost momentum. Mark's leadership style was emerging during this period. He was intensely focused on product and user experience. He personally reviewed every major feature and design change. He made decisions quickly based on intuition and limited data. He was willing to ignore conventional wisdom and user complaints if he believed his vision was right. He was not particularly interested in business operations, finance, or traditional management. He cared about building great products and growing users. This focus on product over everything else would define Facebook's culture. But Mark's leadership style also created challenges. He was not naturally empathetic or politically skilled. He did not always communicate his vision clearly. He sometimes made decisions that seemed arbitrary or unfair to team members. His intense focus could come across as coldness. His unwillingness to explain his reasoning could seem arrogant. Employees either loved working for Mark because of his clarity of vision and decisiveness, or they hated it because they felt undervalued and misunderstood. This polarized leadership style would create both Facebook's greatest strengths and its persistent cultural challenges. In fall 2004, Facebook also faced its first major controversy over intellectual property. The Winklevoss twins and their partner Divya Narendra had started ConnectU, their Harvard social network, and believed Mark had stolen their idea. They filed a lawsuit claiming Mark had violated an agreement to work on their project and had used their ideas to build Facebook. The case would drag on for years, generating massive publicity and eventually settling for $65 million in cash and stock. The legal battle was Mark's introduction to how lawsuits and negative publicity would become regular features of running a large company. Mark's response to the Winklevoss lawsuit revealed his competitive nature. He did not want to settle. He wanted to fight and win. He believed he had done nothing wrong and that the Winklevosses were trying to claim ownership of success they had not earned. Facebook's lawyers eventually convinced him that settling made more economic sense than fighting, But Mark never truly accepted the settlement emotionally. He felt he had been forced to pay people who did not deserve it. This sense of injustice would influence his attitude toward critics and competitors for years. Another major drama of late 2004 was the conflict with Eduardo Saverin. The tension that had been building since Sean Parker's arrival exploded into open warfare. Mark, Dustin, and Sean wanted to move Facebook to Delaware and restructure the company to dilute Eduardo's ownership from 30% to under 10%. They believed Eduardo was not contributing enough to justify his equity stake. Eduardo was in New York working on business development and advertising sales while the core team was in California building the product and managing operations. The geographic separation created mutual frustration and resentment. In an October 2004 meeting, Mark presented Eduardo with new incorporation papers that drastically reduced his ownership. Eduardo felt ambushed and betrayed. He had funded Facebook's early operations. He had worked on the business while Mark coded. Now he was being pushed out. The confrontation was ugly. Eduardo threatened lawsuits. Mark and Sean believed they had no choice, that Eduardo's continued involvement would hinder Facebook's growth. The situation revealed the brutal reality of startup equity. Ownership percentages established when a company is worthless can become enormously valuable if the company succeeds. But the early equity distribution rarely reflects the actual contributions that drive success. Eduardo did sue Facebook, claiming his equity dilution was illegal and fraudulent. The case settled in 2009 for an undisclosed amount. Eduardo received a stake that was much smaller than his original 30% but still made him a billionaire when Facebook went public. The legal settlement also included Eduardo's name being restored to Facebook's founding team. The movie The Social Network, based on Ben Mesrich's book The Accidental Billionaires, dramatized this conflict and portrayed Mark as a cold betrayer. The movie's narrative shaped public perception of Mark for years, depicting him as socially awkward and ethically flexible. Mark hated The Social Network. He thought it was fundamentally inaccurate and unfair. The movie portrayed him as motivated by social ambition and romantic rejection, seeking revenge on the Harvard establishment that looked down on him. Mark insisted his actual motivation was much simpler. He wanted to build something people would find useful. He loved coding and creating products. Yes, he made mistakes in how he treated people. But his core drive was creation, not revenge or social climbing. The movie's huge cultural impact frustrated Mark because it defined his public image in ways he could not fully control or rebut. In 2005, Facebook's growth accelerated dramatically. The platform expanded beyond universities to high schools. By year-end, Facebook had over 5.5 million users. The expansion strategy remained carefully controlled. Mark approved every new school and region. He wanted to maintain quality and culture as the platform grew. He resisted pressure to expand globally too quickly or to open the platform to everyone. He believed the network needed to reach critical mass in each market before moving to the next. This patience and strategic discipline were unusual for a 21-year-old entrepreneur. That year also brought major venture capital investment. Accel Partners led a $12.7 million series of funding round that valued Facebook at around $100 million. Jim Breyer from Accel joined Facebook's board and became an important advisor. The Accel investment came with pressure to monetize and generate revenue. Facebook was spending money quickly on servers, engineers, and operations but had almost no revenue. The investors needed to see a path to profitability. But Mark resisted most monetization efforts. He believed premature advertising would degrade the user experience and slow growth. He wanted to focus on product and growth first, monetization second. This tension between Mark's product-first approach and investors' desire for revenue would recur throughout Facebook's history. Mark had an almost religious belief that if you built something people loved, revenue would eventually follow. Investors wanted to see numbers proving the business model worked. Both perspectives had merit. Mark was right that premature monetization could kill growth. But investors were right that a product with hundreds of millions of users but no revenue was worthless. The genius of Mark's approach was that he held firm on product vision while being just flexible enough on revenue to keep investors satisfied. In 2005, Facebook also faced competition from MySpace, which was the dominant social networking platform in America. MySpace had over 100 million users compared to Facebook's 5 million. MySpace had just been acquired by News Corporation for $580 million. The conventional wisdom was that MySpace had won the social networking wars. Facebook was seen as a niche player for college students. MySpace's customizable profiles and focus on music and entertainment seemed more appealing to mainstream users than Facebook's clean, simple design focused on real identity. But Mark saw things differently. He believed MySpace's strengths were actually weaknesses. The customizable profiles were messy and hard to navigate. The anonymous interactions attracted spam and fake accounts. The focus on entertainment and music distracted from real social connections. Facebook's insistence on real identity using real names created trust and authenticity. Its clean design made navigation easy. Its focus on real relationships rather than meeting strangers created sustained engagement. Mark bet that authentic social networking would beat entertainment-focused networking in the long run. This analysis proved prophetic. By 2008, Facebook had surpassed MySpace in users and engagement. MySpace would collapse under the weight of spam, fake accounts, and poor product decisions. But in 2005, Mark's confidence that Facebook would win required courage. MySpace looked unstoppable. Facebook looked like a college fad that might not survive once students graduated. Mark's willingness to ignore conventional wisdom and trust his own judgment was crucial. He did not let MySpace's apparent dominance distract him from Facebook's distinct vision and approach. In September 2005, Facebook launched a high school version of the platform. This was a major strategic shift. The platform was no longer exclusively for college students. High schoolers represented a massive market opportunity but also significant challenges. The age range dropped to 14, raising concerns about child safety and predatory behavior. The quality of users and content could decline. But Mark believed Facebook needed to grow beyond universities to achieve its mission of connecting everyone. High school was the logical next step. The expansion was successful. Millions of high school students joined, and the feared degradation of quality and culture did not materialize. In 2006, Facebook made several pivotal decisions that set the stage for global dominance. First, they expanded beyond education entirely. In September 2006, Facebook opened to anyone over 13 with a valid email address. This was a huge gamble. The exclusivity that had made Facebook special was gone. Anyone could join. Would this destroy the culture and quality that made Facebook valuable? Or would opening the platform unlock exponential growth? Mark bet on growth. He believed network effects would accelerate if the platform included everyone. Parents, colleagues, and friends outside school networks could now connect. The decision to open registration proved transformative. Facebook's growth exploded. Within months, the user base doubled and then doubled again. The platform was no longer a college network. It was a global social network for everyone. The shift changed everything. Facebook had to rethink its technology infrastructure to handle massive scale. It had to develop content moderation systems for a much larger, more diverse user base. It had to figure out how to keep users engaged when their networks included not just college friends but family, co-workers, and acquaintances from all parts of life. Opening to the general public also attracted major acquisition interest. Yahoo offered $1 billion to acquire Facebook in summer 2006. This was an extraordinary amount for a company with minimal revenue and just 20 million users. Mark's advisors, investors, and employees urged him to accept the offer. $1 billion would make Mark and early employees immensely wealthy. It would provide financial security. It would eliminate business risk. Most 22-year-olds would have taken the money without hesitation. Mark refused. He believed Facebook could become much bigger than Yahoo's offer implied. He thought social networking would become fundamental to the Internet's future. He wanted to build an independent company that would define that future. The decision shocked almost everyone. Peter Thiel, Facebook's first major investor, supported Mark's decision to refuse. Thiel believed in founder control and long-term vision over short-term returns. Other board members were furious. They thought Mark was being arrogant and irrational. How could he turn down $1 billion for a company that might fail? The decision to refuse Yahoo revealed Mark's most essential characteristic. He was not primarily motivated by money. He was motivated by impact and creation. He wanted to build something historically significant. Money was a byproduct, not the goal. This mindset was crucial for Facebook's success. If Mark had been motivated primarily by financial returns, he would have sold to Yahoo or Microsoft or any of the other companies that offered to acquire Facebook. Instead, he held out for the much larger vision of connecting everyone in the world. In September 2006, Facebook launched Newsfeed, the feature that would become the platform's defining innovation and its most controversial. Before Newsfeed, Facebook users had to visit individual profile pages to see updates from friends. This was time-consuming and limited how much content users could consume. Newsfeed aggregated updates from all a user's friends into a single scrolling stream. It used algorithms to determine which updates to show and in what order. The feature was revolutionary. It fundamentally changed how people consumed information and stayed connected. The Newsfeed launch was a disaster in the short term. Users revolted. Within days, millions of Facebook users joined groups protesting Newsfeed. They felt the feature was invasive and creepy. Information that had been available on profile pages felt different when aggregated in a stream. It made Facebook's surveillance of social activity explicit and unavoidable. Users felt their privacy had been violated even though Newsfeed did not actually share any information that was not already visible. Mark and the team were shocked by the intensity of the backlash. They had expected Newsfeed to be popular. Mark's response to the Newsfeed crisis revealed his leadership philosophy. He apologized for the rollout and promised better privacy controls. But he did not remove Newsfeed. He believed the feature was fundamentally good and that users would recognize its value once they got used to it. He was right. Within weeks, usage metrics showed that Newsfeed increased engagement dramatically. Users spent much more time on Facebook. They checked the site much more frequently. They interacted with content much more actively. The same users who had protested Newsfeed became its most active consumers. The Newsfeed crisis taught Mark crucial lessons about user psychology and change management. First, people resist change even when it improves their experience. Second, privacy concerns are often about control and transparency rather than actual information exposure. Third, usage data is more revealing than user complaints. People say they want one thing but their behavior shows they want something else. Fourth, if you believe a feature is fundamentally right, you need courage to persist through initial backlash. These lessons would inform Mark's approach to future product launches and controversies. Newsfeed also established the algorithmic feed as the core organizing principle for social media content. Before Newsfeed, social platforms used reverse chronological order showing the newest posts first. Newsfeed introduced algorithmic ranking, using signals about user interests and engagement to determine what content to surface. This shift had profound implications. It meant Facebook decided what users saw rather than users seeing everything from everyone they followed. It created incentives for content creators to optimize for Facebook's algorithm. And it gave Facebook enormous power over information distribution. In 2007, Facebook faced critical decisions about monetization and business model. The company was spending tens of millions of dollars on infrastructure and engineering but generating minimal revenue. Investors were patient but not infinitely so. Facebook needed to prove it could become profitable. The challenge was monetizing without degrading the user experience or slowing growth. Mark resisted most forms of advertising. He thought banner ads were ugly and ineffective. He thought interruptive ads would drive users away. He needed an advertising model that felt native to the Facebook experience. The solution was social advertising, ads that incorporated social information and recommendations from friends. If your friend liked a brand or event, that social endorsement would appear in ads you saw. This approach made advertising feel less intrusive and more relevant. It also created a virtuous cycle. Advertisers wanted social endorsements because they were more effective than traditional ads. Users tolerated social ads better than banner ads because they felt more personalized and useful. Facebook could charge premium prices because the ads performed better. The social advertising model became Facebook's economic engine. Microsoft invested $240 million in Facebook in October 2007 at a $15 billion valuation. This was an extraordinarily high valuation for a company with modest revenues. But Microsoft saw strategic value in the partnership. The investment included an agreement making Microsoft Facebook's exclusive advertising partner for banner ads. Microsoft also wanted to prevent Google from acquiring or partnering with Facebook. The investment signaled to the market that Facebook was a major platform worth enormous sums despite limited current revenue. The Microsoft investment came during the global financial crisis. Stock markets were collapsing. Credit markets were frozen. The economy was entering what would become the Great Recession. Most companies were struggling. Fundraising became extremely difficult. But Facebook's Microsoft investment showed that even in crisis, exceptional companies could raise capital at premium valuations. The investment also validated Mark's decision to refuse earlier acquisition offers. If Facebook was worth $15 billion in 2007, Yahoo's $1 billion offer in 2006 had been grossly inadequate. In 2008, Facebook's international growth accelerated. The platform launched in multiple languages and expanded aggressively in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. International growth was crucial. The US market was maturing. Growth rates were slowing. But most of the world had not yet joined Facebook. Countries like India, Indonesia, Brazil, and the Philippines represented enormous growth opportunities. Facebook invested heavily in internationalization, translation, and emerging market infrastructure. This global expansion would eventually make Facebook one of the most widely used products in human history. International growth created new challenges. Different cultures had different attitudes toward privacy, free speech, and social interaction. Different governments had different regulations and demands. Different markets had different dominant local competitors. Facebook had to adapt its product and policies for dozens of different contexts while maintaining a coherent global platform. This balancing act between global consistency and local customization would challenge Facebook for years. In 2008, Facebook also launched Facebook Connect, a feature allowing users to log into other websites and apps using their Facebook credentials. This was a strategic masterstroke. It made Facebook the identity layer for the internet. Millions of websites and apps integrated Facebook Connect because it simplified user login and provided social features. Every integration gave Facebook data about user activity across the internet. It made Facebook increasingly central to the web ecosystem. Users faced friction leaving Facebook because their identity and social connections were tied to the platform. By 2009, Facebook had over 200 million users and was growing by millions per week. The platform had become genuinely global. It was available in dozens of languages. It was used in nearly every country. It had surpassed MySpace as the dominant social network. Major media companies, celebrities, brands, and governments were creating Facebook pages. The platform was no longer just a communication tool. It was becoming essential infrastructure for information distribution, community building, and public discourse. Mark's vision of connecting everyone in the world was becoming reality. But success created new challenges. Governments worried about Facebook's power over information and communication. Privacy advocates criticized Facebook's data collection and sharing practices. Competitors accused Facebook of anti-competitive behavior. The platform that had seemed fun and harmless when it was college students sharing photos was looking more threatening now that it included a significant percentage of humanity. In 2010, Facebook crossed 500 million users. That same year, the company became profitable for the first time. Revenue exceeded $1 billion, mostly from advertising. Facebook had proven its business model worked. The platform could generate massive revenue while continuing to grow users and engagement. This proof point was crucial for the eventual initial public offering. Investors needed evidence that Facebook could convert users into sustainable profits. 2010 also brought the release of the Social Network movie. The film, directed by David Fincher and written by Aaron Sorkin, dramatized Facebook's founding and early years. It was critically acclaimed, winning Academy Awards and defining public perception of Mark and Facebook's origin story. The movie portrayed Mark as brilliant but ruthless, willing to betray friends and partners to build his empire. It depicted Eduardo Saverin as a victim and the Winklevoss twins as victims of intellectual property theft. The narrative was compelling and entertaining but simplified and dramatized the actual events. Mark refused to cooperate with the filmmakers or comment on the movie. This decision reflected his general approach to media criticism. He believed that engaging with negative narratives gave them more attention and credibility. Better to ignore and focus on building great products. But the movie's cultural impact was undeniable. For millions of people, Aaron Sorkin's screenplay became the definitive version of Facebook's founding. The nerdy, socially awkward, ethically questionable Mark Zuckerberg of the film overshadowed the actual person. In 2012, Facebook went public in one of the most anticipated initial public offerings in history. The company priced shares at $38, valuing Facebook at over $100 billion. This was the largest technology IPO ever. Mark became one of the youngest billionaires in history. The IPO made thousands of Facebook employees wealthy, created dozens of millionaires, and raised $16 billion for the company. It was supposed to be a triumphant moment celebrating Facebook's success and potential. Instead, the IPO was a technical and public relations disaster. Nasdaq's systems failed on the first day of trading, causing massive confusion and delays. The stock price dropped immediately after the first day, eventually falling to around $18, half the IPO price. Investors lost billions. Lawsuits accused Facebook and its underwriters of misleading investors. The media narrative shifted from celebrating Facebook's success to questioning whether the company was overvalued and whether Mark was a competent leader. The IPO debacle was Mark's most public failure to that point. Mark's response to the failed IPO showed his long-term focus. While the media obsessed over the stock price, Mark focused on building better products and growing the business. He told employees to ignore the stock price and focus on creating value for users. He believed that if Facebook built great products and served users well, the stock price would eventually recover. He was right. Within 18 months, Facebook's stock price had recovered to the IPO price. Within 3 years, it had tripled. By staying focused on product and execution rather than stock price, Mark navigated through what could have been a fatal crisis. The period around the IPO also revealed tensions between Mark's control and shareholder expectations. Mark had structured Facebook's voting shares to maintain control even as a public company. He held majority voting power despite owning a minority of equity. This dual-class share structure allowed Mark to make long-term decisions without worrying about short-term stock price fluctuations or activist investors. Critics argued this structure was undemocratic and gave too much power to one person. Supporters argued it protected Facebook's long-term vision from short-term pressures. In 2012, Facebook also made its most important acquisition, purchasing Instagram for $1 billion. Instagram was a photo-sharing app with 30 million users and no revenue. Many thought the acquisition price was absurdly high. Facebook was paying over $30 per Instagram user. Critics called it another dot-com bubble, paying crazy money for an app that might be a fad. But Mark saw Instagram's potential. The app had incredible engagement and growth. It was particularly strong with younger users and international markets. Most importantly, it represented a potential competitive threat. Mobile was transforming how people used the internet. Smartphones were replacing desktop computers as the primary way people accessed the web. Facebook had been designed for desktop browsers and was struggling to adapt to mobile. Instagram was mobile first and growing virally on phones. If Instagram continued growing independently, it could become a parallel social network that competed with Facebook. By acquiring Instagram, Mark eliminated a potential competitor and acquired a platform that complemented Facebook's strengths while addressing its mobile weaknesses. The Instagram acquisition showed Mark's strategic sophistication. He was willing to pay what seemed like an outrageous price to neutralize a competitive threat and position Facebook for the mobile future. He also handled the acquisition well post-purchase. Rather than integrating Instagram into Facebook and destroying what made it special, Mark let Instagram operate independently with its own brand, culture, and product direction. This hands-off approach preserved Instagram's value while giving Facebook the benefits of owning the platform. In 2014, Facebook made another major acquisition, purchasing WhatsApp for $19 billion. WhatsApp was a messaging app with 450 million users and minimal revenue. The acquisition price shocked everyone. $19 billion was an extraordinary sum for a messaging app. But Mark again saw strategic value others missed. Messaging was becoming more important than social networking, especially in international markets. WhatsApp was the dominant messaging platform in much of the developing world. It had incredible user loyalty and engagement. And it represented a potential future where people communicated through private messaging rather than public social networking. The WhatsApp acquisition also neutralized a competitive threat. If WhatsApp continued growing independently, it could become a communications platform that competed with Facebook. People might spend more time in WhatsApp and less time in Facebook. By acquiring WhatsApp, Mark ensured that whether users preferred public social networking or private messaging, they were using a Facebook-owned platform. The strategy of owning multiple platforms targeting different use cases and demographics became central to Facebook's long-term approach. Mark's acquisition strategy of buying potential competitors at seemingly high prices was controversial. Critics accused Facebook of anti-competitive behavior, using its massive resources to acquire or crush any company that might compete with it. The Federal Trade Commission investigated but ultimately approved both the Instagram and WhatsApp acquisitions. Defenders argued that Mark was simply making smart business decisions, investing in innovative companies and preventing competitors from acquiring them instead. The debate about whether these acquisitions were normal corporate strategy or anti-competitive abuse would intensify over the following years. By 2015, Facebook had over 1.4 billion users. The platform was available in over 100 languages. It was used daily by over half its user base, an extraordinary engagement level. Facebook had proven it could maintain user engagement even as the platform matured and users accumulated thousands of connections. The Newsfeed algorithm had evolved to prioritize content from friends and family over brands and publishers, keeping the platform focused on personal connection rather than media consumption. Facebook's business was thriving. Revenue exceeded $18 billion, nearly all from advertising. The company's advertising business was extraordinarily efficient. Facebook's targeting capabilities, based on the massive amount of data users shared, allowed advertisers to reach precise audiences. The social endorsement aspect of Facebook ads made them more effective than traditional advertising. And Facebook's auction-based advertising system maximized revenue by letting advertisers compete for ad space. These factors combined to make Facebook one of the most profitable advertising platforms in history. But success brought intensifying scrutiny and criticism. Privacy advocates argued that Facebook collected too much data and gave users too little control. Media companies complained that Facebook was siphoning advertising revenue that had previously funded journalism. Parents worried about how social media affected children's mental health and development. Governments worried about Facebook's power over information and discourse. The platform that had seemed like a fun way to connect with friends was now being described as a threat to privacy, democracy, and social cohesion. The 2016 US presidential election marked a turning point in public perception of Facebook. Russian operatives used Facebook to spread disinformation and divisive content designed to influence the election outcome. Fake news stories spread virally on Facebook, often getting more engagement than legitimate journalism. Political polarization seemed to be accelerating, with Facebook's algorithm potentially amplifying extreme and divisive content. After Donald Trump won the election, critics blamed Facebook for enabling foreign interference and spreading misinformation. Mark's initial response to criticism about Facebook's role in the election was defensive. He said the idea that fake news on Facebook influenced the election was a crazy idea. This tone-deaf response generated massive backlash. It seemed like Mark was not taking seriously the legitimate concerns about his platform's societal impact. He eventually reversed course, acknowledging that Facebook needed to do more to combat misinformation and foreign interference. But the damage to his and Facebook's reputation was done. The narrative had shifted from Facebook connecting the world to Facebook threatening democracy. The Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2018 further damaged Facebook's reputation. It was revealed that a political consulting firm had accessed data from 87 million Facebook users without their knowledge or consent. The data had been used for political advertising and voter targeting. The scandal revealed how Facebook's platform could be exploited for large-scale data harvesting. It showed that Facebook had not adequately protected user data. And it reinforced concerns about how personal information shared on Facebook could be weaponized by bad actors. Mark testified before Congress in April 2018 about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook's data practices. The testimony was Mark's most public reckoning with Facebook's societal impact. He wore a suit and tie rather than his usual hoodie and t-shirt, signaling that he was taking the moment seriously. He apologized repeatedly for Facebook's failures. He acknowledged the company had not done enough to prevent abuse of the platform. He committed to doing better. The testimony was widely analyzed and memed. Mark's sometimes awkward responses and the senator's often confused questions became viral content. The congressional testimony revealed the challenges of explaining complex technology platforms to non-technical audiences and regulators. Mark struggled to explain Facebook's business model and data practices in simple terms. Senators asked questions that showed fundamental misunderstandings about how social media and the internet work. The communication gap between Silicon Valley and Washington was apparent. This gap would complicate efforts to regulate technology companies and address their societal impacts. In response to Cambridge Analytica and other scandals, Facebook made major changes to its platform and policies. The company restricted data access for third-party developers. It created new privacy controls giving users more transparency and control over their data. It invested heavily in content moderation and security teams. It built systems to identify and remove fake accounts, bots, and coordinated inauthentic behavior. It implemented fact-checking programs to label false information. These changes required enormous investment but were necessary to rebuild trust. Facebook also faced growing regulatory pressure globally. The European Union implemented the General Data Protection Regulation, establishing strict rules about data collection and user consent. Governments in Germany, Australia, and other countries passed laws targeting social media platforms. Antitrust regulators in the US and Europe opened investigations into whether Facebook had abused its market power. The era of minimal regulation and self-governance for internet platforms was ending. Facebook and other tech giants would face increasing legal and regulatory constraints. The content moderation challenges Facebook faced became increasingly difficult. The platform hosted billions of pieces of content posted by billions of users every day. Some content was clearly harmful and illegal, like child exploitation or terrorism. But most content existed in gray areas. What counted as hate speech versus free expression? When should political misinformation be removed versus labeled? How should the platform handle disputed health claims or conspiracy theories? These questions had no easy answers and massive implications for public discourse. Mark's role as the ultimate arbiter of these content policy decisions placed enormous power and responsibility in one person's hands. When Facebook decided to remove certain content or ban certain users, critics said the platform was censoring legitimate speech. When Facebook allowed controversial content to remain, other critics said the platform was enabling hate and violence. Mark and Facebook were damned if they removed content and damned if they did not. The only winning move seemed to be not to be in the position of deciding what 2 billion people could say to each other. In 2020, Facebook faced unprecedented challenges from the COVID pandemic and the US presidential election. The pandemic created urgent public health communication needs. People relied on Facebook for information about the virus, safety measures, and vaccines. But the platform also spread misinformation about COVID that potentially endangered public health. Facebook tried to label or remove false health claims while allowing open debate about lockdowns and policy responses. Drawing these lines was extraordinarily difficult when scientific understanding was evolving and expert opinions diverged. The 2020 election created even more intense pressure. Facebook made major policy changes to reduce election-related misinformation. The company banned political advertising in the week before the election. It labeled posts from candidates claiming victory before official results. It added information labels to posts about voting processes and election integrity. But these measures were criticized as both too aggressive, censoring legitimate political speech, and too timid, allowing dangerous misinformation to spread. Facebook again found itself in an impossible position with critics on all sides. The January 6, 2021 attack on the US Capitol intensified debates about social media's role in political violence. Rioters had coordinated and spread information partly through Facebook. After the attack, Facebook banned President Trump from the platform indefinitely, citing the risk of inciting further violence. The decision was immediately controversial. Supporters said Facebook was right to prevent its platform from being used to incite violence. Critics said a private company should not have the power to silence a democratically elected president. The ban crystallized concerns about social media companies' power over political speech. In response to criticism about content moderation, Facebook created an independent oversight board to review major content decisions. The board, composed of journalists, legal experts, and human rights advocates, could overrule Facebook's decisions about specific content. This was supposed to create more accountability and legitimacy for content moderation. But critics argued the oversight board was a fig leaf, giving the appearance of independent oversight while Facebook retained ultimate control. The board's actual impact on content policy remains debated. In October 2021, Mark announced Facebook was changing its corporate name to Meta. The rebranding reflected a strategic shift toward the metaverse, a vision of immersive virtual reality experiences replacing traditional internet interfaces. Mark believed the metaverse would be the next major computing platform after mobile phones. He wanted Meta to define this future the way Facebook had defined social networking. The company would invest tens of billions of dollars in virtual reality hardware and software. The name change was widely criticized and mocked. Critics saw it as an attempt to escape Facebook's damaged brand and the growing regulatory and reputational problems. The timing seemed desperate, coming amid whistleblower leaks revealing internal documents showing Facebook knew its platforms caused harm. The fact that Mark was pivoting to talking about virtual reality futures while Facebook faced concrete problems with misinformation and mental health seemed tone-deaf. The metaverse vision, while potentially valid long-term, felt disconnected from the immediate challenges the company faced. The Metaverse Pivot also revealed Mark's long-term thinking and willingness to invest in unproven technologies. While critics mocked the metaverse as science fiction or a distraction, Mark was making massive bets on what he believed would be computing's next paradigm. He was willing to lose billions of dollars per quarter on Reality Labs, Meta's metaverse division, while the technology was still immature and the market was skeptical. This was the same long-term orientation that had led Mark to refuse acquisition offers and build Facebook into a global platform. Whether the metaverse bet would pay off remained uncertain. Frances Haugen, a former Facebook data scientist, became a whistleblower in 2021. She leaked thousands of internal documents to journalists and regulators. The documents revealed that Facebook's internal research showed Instagram harmed teenage girls' mental health. They showed Facebook knew its algorithm amplified divisive content but resisted changes that would reduce engagement. They showed Facebook applied content moderation inconsistently across different languages and regions. The leaked documents created a firestorm of criticism and regulatory pressure. Mark's response to the Haugen leaks was to defend Facebook's record while acknowledging room for improvement. He argued that Facebook's internal research showed nuanced and mixed impacts, not clear harm. He said Facebook made difficult trade-offs between different values like safety, privacy, and free expression. He emphasized the positive impacts of connecting people globally. But this defensive posture did not satisfy critics who believed the leaked documents revealed systematic prioritization of growth and engagement over user well-being. The whistleblower leaks intensified calls for regulating Facebook and other tech platforms. Legislators in the US and Europe proposed new laws addressing platform accountability, data privacy, and algorithmic transparency. Antitrust regulators pursued cases to potentially break up Meta's acquisitions of Instagram and WhatsApp. The regulatory environment for tech platforms was fundamentally changing. The era of light-touch regulation was ending. Facebook would face much more intensive legal and regulatory scrutiny going forward. By 2022, Meta's business was showing signs of stress. The company's advertising revenue growth was slowing. Apple's iOS privacy changes had made Facebook's advertising targeting less effective, reducing revenue. Competition from TikTok was pulling users and attention away from Facebook and Instagram. The massive spending on the metaverse was generating losses but little near-term revenue. Meta's stock price fell dramatically, wiping out hundreds of billions in market value. The narrative shifted from unstoppable tech giant to struggling mature company facing existential challenges. Mark responded with major cost-cutting. Meta laid off over 11,000 employees, about 13% of the workforce. This was the first major layoffs in Facebook's history. Mark called 2023 the year of efficiency. He said Meta needed to become leaner and more focused. The company reduced office space, cut underperforming projects, and flattened organizational hierarchy. These changes were painful but necessary to preserve profitability while making massive metaverse investments. They also showed Mark willing to make difficult decisions when business realities demanded. Meta's recovery in 2023 and 2024 was remarkable. The company's advertising business rebounded as it developed new targeting methods to replace iOS data. Reels, Meta's short-form video product competing with TikTok, gained huge user adoption and engagement. The cost-cutting improved profit margins. Artificial intelligence products, particularly large language models, showed promising potential for new businesses. Meta's stock price recovered dramatically, adding hundreds of billions in market value. The company that looked threatened in 2022 looked resurgent by 2024. Looking at Mark Zuckerberg's complete story reveals patterns and lessons. First, the importance of timing and historical context. Mark was born at exactly the right moment to ride the personal computer and internet revolution. He came of age just as broadband internet and social networking technology matured. If he had been born 10 years earlier or later, Facebook might never have existed. Timing is not everything, but it matters enormously. Second, the role of obsessive focus and persistence. From childhood, Mark was obsessed with programming and building things. He spent thousands of hours coding when other kids played. This obsessive focus continued through college and Facebook's early years. Mark worked constantly, learned continuously, and never gave up despite challenges. The intensity of his focus and persistence was as important as his intelligence or vision. Third, the value of long-term thinking and patience. Mark repeatedly refused short-term gains to pursue long-term vision. He turned down acquisition offers that would have made him wealthy instantly. He prioritized user growth over revenue for years. He invested billions in unproven technologies like virtual reality. This long-term orientation was possible partly because of his youth and partly because he maintained control through dual-class shares. But it was primarily a function of his values and vision. Fourth, the importance of relationships and partnerships. Mark benefited enormously from Sean Parker's mentorship, Peter Thiel's investment and advice, Sheryl Sandberg's operational leadership, and countless other relationships. No one builds a company alone. Mark's success reflected his ability to attract talented people and maintain important relationships. His failures often involved relationship breakdowns, like the Eduardo Saverin conflict. Fifth, the double-edged nature of founder control. Mark's control allowed Facebook to pursue long-term strategies despite short-term pressures. But it also meant Facebook's values and blind spots were Mark's values and blind spots. When Mark was slow to recognize harms Facebook was causing, the entire company was slow to respond. Founder control creates clarity and speed but also risks and vulnerabilities. Sixth, the inevitability of trade-offs and unintended consequences. Facebook connected billions of people, enabling communication and community building. But it also spread misinformation, enabled surveillance capitalism, and may have contributed to polarization and mental health problems. Mark genuinely wanted to connect people and make the world more open. But his creation had negative effects he did not foresee and arguably still does not fully acknowledge. All powerful technologies create both benefits and harms. Seventh, the challenge of scale. Problems that were manageable when Facebook had thousands of users became catastrophic when it had billions. Content moderation that could be done manually at small scale required armies of moderators and sophisticated AI at global scale. Business models that seemed innocuous for college students had different implications for democracy and society when they shaped information flows for half of humanity. Scale changes everything. Mark Zuckerberg today is 40 years old and one of the world's wealthiest people with a net worth over $100 billion. He has been Facebook's CEO for over 20 years, longer than most people stay in any job. He has an extraordinary wife, Priscilla Chan, whom he married in 2012. They have 3 daughters together. Mark and Priscilla have pledged to give away 99% of their wealth during their lifetimes through the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which funds science, education, and other causes. Mark's legacy is still being written. Facebook, or Meta as the corporate entity is now called, continues evolving. The core social networking products have over 3 billion users. Instagram has become one of the most influential platforms for visual culture. WhatsApp is essential communication infrastructure in much of the developing world. The metaverse investments have not yet paid off but might define computing's future. The company faces persistent regulatory scrutiny and criticism but remains profitable and powerful. Understanding Mark Zuckerberg requires holding multiple truths simultaneously. He is genuinely motivated by a vision of connecting humanity. He is also ruthlessly competitive and willing to crush competitors. He built products that have improved billions of lives. His products have also caused real harm. He is brilliant and visionary. He also has significant blind spots. He is both the nerdy programmer still motivated by building cool things and the billionaire CEO wielding enormous power over global discourse. The most important lesson from Mark's story may be about the relationship between technology and society. The same platform can connect protest movements fighting for democracy and spread misinformation undermining democracy. The same algorithmic feed can help you stay in touch with distant relatives and can trap you in filter bubbles of extreme views. Technology is neither inherently good nor bad. Its impacts depend on design choices, business models, and governance structures. Mark and Facebook made choices that maximized growth and engagement. Those choices created both tremendous value and significant harm. As we look forward, the question is not whether Mark Zuckerberg is a hero or villain. He is neither and both. The question is what lessons we can learn from his story about building and governing powerful technologies. How do we preserve the benefits of social connection while mitigating the harms of surveillance and manipulation? How do we enable free expression while preventing the spread of dangerous misinformation? How do we let entrepreneurs innovate while protecting society from negative externalities? These are the essential questions Mark's story raises. Mark's journey from a programming-obsessed kid in suburban New York to builder of one of history's most influential technologies reveals both human potential and human limitations. He achieved something remarkable by any measure. He built a product used by nearly half of humanity. He created enormous wealth for investors and employees. He facilitated communication and community for billions. But he also created systems that have amplified some of humanity's worst tendencies. The same drive and focus that made him successful also made him slow to recognize problems his platform was causing. What can today's entrepreneurs and investors learn from Mark's story? First, the importance of solving real human needs and problems. Facebook succeeded because it addressed genuine desires for connection and communication. Second, the power of network effects and how they can create winner-take-all dynamics. Third, the value of controlling your company and thinking long-term. Fourth, the need to attract and retain exceptional talent. Fifth, the inevitability that successful products will have unintended negative consequences that require attention and mitigation. For society more broadly, Mark's story illustrates the challenges of governing powerful technologies created by private companies. Facebook's decisions about content moderation, data collection, and algorithmic design have enormous social implications. But these decisions are made by a private company ultimately accountable to shareholders and controlled by one person. Democratic societies have not figured out how to ensure that platforms with such public importance serve public interests. This remains one of the central governance challenges of the digital age. Mark Zuckerberg's story is ultimately about the complexity of creating at scale. Building something millions or billions of people use is extraordinarily difficult. It requires technical skill, strategic vision, operational excellence, and sustained execution over many years. But it also creates responsibilities and challenges that most people never face. The decisions Mark makes affect billions of lives. The platform he built shapes how people communicate, learn, and participate in democracy. This is both the opportunity and the burden of creating at global scale. As Mark enters his 40s, he faces questions about his next 2 decades. Will he remain Facebook's CEO indefinitely like Warren Buffett at Berkshire? Will he eventually step aside for new leadership? Will the Metaverse vision succeed or become an expensive failure? Will Meta's core social products continue growing or decline as users move to new platforms? Will regulation fundamentally constrain Meta's business or prove manageable? These questions remain open. But whatever happens, Mark has already secured his place in technology history as the person who built the platform that connected billions and changed how humanity communicates.